Good evening, everybody. My name is Angasa Ichile McKenzie, and I'm the Director of Southern Marylanders for Racial Equality. I want to welcome everybody to our forum entitled Race Around the Roundtable. So, we're having a discussion about racism and anti racism, and the goal here is to really see how people are raised and how our background can really affect how we view the world, because if we don't have any kind of interaction and common conversation with people who come from different backgrounds, I think that is the basis for when we find ourselves with these difficulties. And outside of the legislation, outside of the activism and things that we're doing, just to have an understanding among the people in our community, because we all have to live here together, and making sure that we have an open dialogue with each other, our neighbors, our coworkers, our friends, our church members, everybody like that, and making sure that we keep the flow of dialogue open so that we can actually understand each other as we go forward, because that is the basis of the solution. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment of silence for Representative John Lewis, who passed away, and as an icon of the civil rights movement. And I believe fully in my heart that this country would not be where it is right now without his efforts. Okay, so I'm going to pass this to our illustrious moderator, Dorothy Bronner. She is the chairperson of the Public Awareness Working Group for Southern Marylanders for Racial Equality. And in her own life, she is an event and meeting planner for a nonprofit. So she is very well experienced with this, and I'm so glad that she was able to pull this together. She's going to introduce you to our panelists, and we're going to get started. Dorothy, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Again, we're here for an honest, open, a transparent conversation about race. And we have with us today Melanie Daffler. And Melanie taught school for 6 years, left that profession to be a stay-at-home mom, and has opened her own piano studio that she's run for 5 years. Thanks for being with us, Melanie. We also have Pat Ziegler. Pat has been an editor for technical publications for the past 30 years, and she has recently changed helms and is working for a financial institution so that she could be closer to home. And Pat is coming to us today from Downingtown, Pennsylvania. And last but not least, we have Seth Heiserman. And Seth lives in Charles County with his wife and his 6 young children. And he stays busy operating his business and being involved with his church and the community. Welcome, guys. And before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few rules here, that this is always a passionate discussion. It's always a discussion that is a bit uncomfortable. So we ask that you respect one another and mute your lines when you're not speaking, and just have fun, relax. This is no way an attack. We're trying to understand one another, because I really believe that once we understand that we're all here for the American dream, for equality for everyone, we would have a better society. But it starts with us as individuals. It starts with us, the mindset, the heart change. It starts in all those areas. So I am going to start with Melanie. And Melanie, one of the questions that I have for the panel, and I'll start with you, is what was your level of exposure to minorities and people of different ethnicities as you were growing up?
So when I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, which you may or may not know, I did not know this until I was an adult, are very, very, very segregated. Chicago is one of the biggest places that has historically been redlined. A lot of times when we would go downtown, we would stay out of the bad neighborhoods, but there was always an understanding that the bad neighborhoods were not white people. Sorry, this is really hard for me to say. I grew up, I was born in Aurora, Illinois. And that was another reason my parents decided to move farther out into the country, farther out into the suburbs. Actually, it wasn't really suburbs then, into good school districts. I'm going to use air quotes again, good school districts. And my exposure to minorities growing up, I graduated in a class of 185. 3 of those students were not white. Additionally, my dad and my mom had a 6-unit apartment building that was in Section 9 housing. In Illinois, that's, I don't know if Maryland has the same, but in Illinois, it was the low-income subsidized housing. And so there was always an element of, there was often an element of race, but there was also very often an element of class and socioeconomic status that played into being the landlord's daughter and seeing the families living in the apartment building. And so that there was always sort of like unequal balance of power. It was definitely not an, I did not see myself, I was not raised in I was raised in a home, I'm sorry, I'm trying to put the best construction on this that I can. I was raised in a home where I was taught to respect people, but as far as equality or the more systemic things, I was not made aware of those until much, much, much later in my life.
Okay. Pat, your exposure as you were growing up?
In a lot of ways, very similar to Melanie. I grew up in the suburbs of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and it was almost exclusively white area, middle class. There was no diversity in terms of race, very little diversity even in terms of religion. It was very much people who looked like me or I looked like them, and there really wasn't much interaction, and any interaction I had with minorities was much later in life. We came from a strong Catholic upbringing where we were taught to respect and love one another, but there was also an underlying feeling of not necessarily not to appreciate or love thy neighbor if the neighbor didn't look like you. All the neighbors look like us, so that was the background.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Seth, your background,
Yes, ma'am. So I grew up here in rural Southern Maryland, Charles County, and there wasn't a whole lot of ethnic diversity, I guess you would say, but there was a lot of blacks and whites, and rode the bus with blacks and played sports and had black friends, and so I didn't think that I was racist. I didn't really know that racism was a thing. I didn't really understand it growing up. But as I grew later in life, I certainly realized it was a part of the fabric of Southern Maryland, of certainly a lot of what I believed and who I identified as, growing up. Like I said, I had black friends, so I didn't think that it was a real thing. But looking back, we all told off-color jokes. A lot of people used the N-word, on both sides of the racial divide here, and everybody was comfortable with it. It was just kind of part of life. There was definitely I don't want to say a caste system, but because it's clearly not that. But you could definitely see there was pretty well an economic divide between blacks and whites. My grandparents had black people that helped them on the farm, and they would pay them a menial amount. They had black friends that helped, and to this day, there's a lady that's 101 years old now. She's still a dear, respected friend, and she was one of my grandparents. She helped one of the hired hands on their farm back way before I was born. So I've learned a lot from her as well as their experience, and I think racism is. I don't want to get too far ahead here, but I think racism is something that we're all growing out of as a country, and there's still a lot of the ugly vestiges of it, but we have a long ways to go.
I'm sorry.
So let me ask this question. Did you accept racism as a way of life while you were growing up? I mean, especially Seth, with your story, it's like I got black friends, and I know we're all here, but did you accept that there's racial inequality and it's just part of your norm?
You want me to answer first?
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I certainly accepted it because I didn't know anything different than that.
Mhm.
And neither did my black friends or my other white friends. It was just to us as children and then as adolescents and then young adults, it was life. And for me, it wasn't really until I left the area and I got a greater understanding of the world, lived in another country, and really had my eyes open to how screwed up we were.
Dorothy, I just wanted to jump in about what Melanie said. My early years, I was born in Chicago. So it's interesting that she grew up near Chicago. So I was born there. I lived there until I was about 9, and then I moved to Florida. So the funny thing is, when I lived in Chicago, my mother's whole family is from there. That's where my parents met. My dad is Nigerian, but they met in college in Chicago. And my mother's from the South Side of Chicago, and I didn't interact at all with white people until I was in 3rd grade because I got into a gifted school, the Pritzker gifted school. And so it's interesting because Chicago is divided almost like a pie. Like, it's so segregated. I would just guess that Chicago is one of the most segregated large cities in this country. And I hear stories from relatives about going out to Cicero and just being harassed by people out there. And I think I recently posted an article about the suburbs of Chicago where they were talking about how when Black people tried to move out there, they were literally had mobs of people, outside their houses were like firebombed and things like that. And this happened in New York. I think people think that this is a Southern problem or, something like that. This is nationwide that people were experiencing these things. So the other ironic part about that is that my grandfather moved to Chicago to escape racism in Alabama. And so it's just kind of like, I think people don't realize that people have literally moved themselves around looking for safe haven from racism. And almost at every turn, we can't find it. That's the frustrating thing. It doesn't matter how good you are. It doesn't matter how educated you become. It doesn't matter how much you follow the letter of the law. Because of racism, you're always going to have this dis-ease. You're always going to have this uneasy feeling. So I just wanted to throw that out there at you guys, because that's part of my background. Not,
Okay.
I'm not the subject of the panel, but I thought that was really, really interesting.
Okay, like I said, it's a passionate it's a passionate issue. So I appreciate that. I really do. And those of you who are looking and watching on Facebook and YouTube, feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll get to those. Melanie, how do you feel? I'm going to pivot. I'm going to get back to you, Pat, and ask you about the same question I asked Seth. However, I just wanted Melanie to respond to what Ansanga was saying, since you grew up in Chicago on the other side, I'm assuming.
Sure, absolutely. I think what Augusta says is spot on. When I went to college, I moved from a very rural area back into River Forest, where we had, it was a Lutheran college, but we had a really large cohort of commuting students, and particularly Latino, from the Latino community, because we lived really close to, again, it was a very segregated Dominican Republic neighborhood, like 3 or 4 blocks away. And so a lot of the students that came to my college commuted blocks away. And even on the campus, we had, there was definitely, segregation is the best way I can put it. Whether it was intentional or unintentional, I probably can't say. It was probably a bit of both. But I think Augusta hit the nail on the head. It was incredibly segregated. I mean, you can still go back and see not just Black and white communities, but you see the Latino communities, you can see Ukrainian communities, and they're all very like almost by street. And this is, 40 years after the civil rights movement, it still remains that way today. So yes, she hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and there are lots of communities today in the 21st century that are segregated, and it's practiced throughout. In real estate terms, it's called redlining. It's that's where you take your clients because this is where they prefer to live without asking them. You just do it, and it's conversations like these that it's the only thing that's going to change the minds of these folks that are doing this. And some of it is unconscious, some of it is conscious, and we just don't know the difference anymore. And it's time for us to actually come together and be united. Pat, you had mentioned that your neighborhood, your area that you grew up in, was based a white neighborhood. So tell us about your experience when you were first in an environment that you saw minorities, and you saw, how did you feel? How did you respond to that? And how did your parents and your family respond to it?
It's interesting because I think my attitudes were shaped more because I read a lot. And at a certain point, I was interested in John Kennedy, which led to Robert Kennedy, which led to Martin Luther King. And it was more of an eye-opening experience because even growing up through high school, my high school was similar to Melanie's in that we had maybe 500 kids and 3 were Black. So I didn't have personal interaction. I didn't really experience my family having personal interaction with Blacks. It was more through my reading and confusion as to, well, wait a minute, why is this way? I think I was very naive, and I had assumed Black people were with Black people, white people with white people, Irish were with Irish, Italians were with Italians. So it was everybody kind of thought their own, and it wasn't a discriminatory thing against Blacks. And I think it was learning more that many of these practices were intentional, were actively discriminatory to separate Blacks from whites, and how that inequity, at least from people in like a lot of my relatives, that was okay. Like it was this sounds terrible, was almost deserved because of the impressions they had of Black people and the stereotypical horrible racist views as to what characterized a particular group of people. So while I didn't, like I said, I didn't see my family interacting with people of other races, I think that's a very telling thing, you know, that we weren't in an environment that was open to that kind of interaction.
Yeah.
I know I feel I learned a lot more from what wasn't being said than from what was.
Yes.
We didn't use the N word in my house. That was not okay. We didn't use racial slurs. It was just more about the actions speaking louder than the words.
Yeah.
How about you, Seth? Is that what you experienced as well?
Yeah, I think so.
I think
Okay,
I think it's interesting that, like, with Melanie and Pat, they didn't grow up with Black people, but with Seth, he did grow up with Black people, and they still kind of arrived in a similar place as far as thinking,
yes,
Black people over here, white people over here. The Black people stay on this level, white people stay on this level. I'm gesturing down and then I'm gesturing up because you guys can't see me, but because these things are systemic. They're not just on accident. They didn't just happen like that. You know, there are literally laws that continue to this day, like 2020. There's still Black farmers right here in Charles County that can't get the same fair shake, the same subsidies that white farmers get. There's still people who are applying for jobs, and because their name is Keisha instead of Karen, they're not going to get the job, even though their resumes are identical. There's still redlining, and I'm a realtor. I'll tell you, there are colleagues that I work with that will automatically tell their white clients, no, you don't want to live over there. And then, or the banks will not lend, or they'll give you a higher interest rate depending on what zip code you're looking at, you know? So I think when Black people segregate ourselves, usually it's for protection, because we're not always trustworthy of the institutions. If I'm banking with a white banker, am I going to get the same fair shake as if I'm banking with a Black banker? If I'm working with a white realtor, am I going to get the same fair shake as working with a Black realtor? You know, and so I think, and I'm just saying that kind of generalizes to other communities as well, that, you know, when we were freed from slavery, when we freed ourselves as well from slavery, Black people voted, got married, took elected office. There were more Congress people, and during the restoration or the Reconstruction in the 1800s, you know, than we have now, because as soon as we had the opportunity, we took those opportunities, but through systematic, sometimes violent, sometimes legislative measures, they took it all back. Literally took it all back. The rise of the KKK happened at that time, the poll tax and all these different methods to take that vote away, to take the land away, to take the jobs away, to take the businesses away, like Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They literally had a bloody riot and massacred Black people who were doing well, who owned homes, had streets full of businesses. And I think that the stereotype that Black people are lesser, the Black people are more lazy, is a narrative that people share among themselves, white people share, to kind of make themselves comfortable with keeping Black people there, because it is systemic. It's not just an individual thing. It's not just a you or a you or a you or a you. It's just, it is collective things, you know. And I've worked in education and real estate, both of which are totally biased industries. And when you see those things from the inside, you're like, wow, this is really, really insidious. So my 2 cents.
Yeah, we're not that.
Thank you.
We think that a lot of times that the racism is behind us because we don't see a lot of those old things anymore. But we're not that far removed from some of these horrendous, heinous things that were really a prevalent part of our society. My grandparents moved here in the 40s to Charles County from he from North Carolina and she from Connecticut.
Mhm.
And once they had enough money after the Depression, they bought a bar together. And it was already an existing business when they bought it, but there was a black side and there was a white side.
Mhm.
And that was just how everybody accepted it. It was like a smoking section that was dingy and a non-smoking section that was nice, and the
And I
whites had
know
to go their
exactly.
side. And if the blacks came on their side, there were social consequences for that. God forbid something like that happened today, but that's a generation ago, not that long ago.
I
Yeah.
know exactly the spot you're talking about too. And that's and it's real. So how do we pivot? I guess that's the new word that everybody's using. But I'm saying, think about how let's say the five of us
Mhm.
grew up very different. From me, I'm from Charles County as well. And it's the same rules. You don't go here, like Seth was saying, you stay over here, and you don't, and it's learned at home. It's learned because your parents try to protect you. Whereas a lot of the white parents, it's like, what school are you going to? It's like your future is there, and we're just trying to stay alive and survive.
Yeah.
And where do we go from here? And I want to ask this question, and it is, and I told everyone that this was going to be, it's going to be uncomfortable, but it's going to be transparent, because a lot of people don't believe that they're racist. However, if you believe that Black people should be over here, and Hispanics over here, and Asians over here, and everybody should have their own little compartment, but the whole belongs to white people. And we can dole it out. We can legislate you over in the corner. We can legislate you so that you can't prosper. You buy a piece of land. It's great. It's in a wonderful location. Oops, you go out to the county and it won't perk. So you're just stuck with dead land, even though it's great and everybody knows it's great. But because of the way that the laws are written and the policies go, you are, they force you out. And then when you sell it and they say, well, it's not worth this because it's not perked, and you drive by in 3 years and there's a huge, beautiful, everything you dreamed of is there. So I'm saying, in this climate, can you stand by? Can you continue to stand by and let these things happen and not say anything? Because that's why it's existed. It's existed because not any of the sides won't say anything. And once we say something, then we're a mob, we're rioting, I don't know what else those people want. Because that's what I hear. What's wrong with them? You live in America, you can do whatever you want. And
that's so not true.
Yeah, it's not true. So I'm saying, what do you guys think? Because you do have similar backgrounds, even from Chicago, from Charles County, and from the Philadelphia. But we all have the same experience. Isn't that ironic? So, yeah, it is. It is. So, was there ever a time that you kind of looked in the mirror by yourself and said, wow, am I a racist? And anybody can answer.
Well, okay, I'll answer.
Okay.
I never had that kind of moment because I think I was judging myself based on my experiences with my family. And in my mind, they were the racists, I wasn't. And so, and I think it's more how I was defining that word. And in my mind, there's a Broadway show called Avenue Q, and there's a song in it everyone's a little bit racist. And I was interpreting racist to mean biased or, consciously or unconsciously biased. We're all biased against some things. I think it's more recently that the term racism, I've looked at it a little differently and seen it's not just a bias. It's not just a basic prejudice because, I don't like red hair or I don't like Jewish people or something that way. It's more the fact that with whites and blacks, whites are in a position of power, of control. And that's the difference between the bias and being a racist. I like to think I'm not a racist, but I think I'm very naive in a lot of areas of understanding the layers of that term and what it means. I may not be going out using racial slurs. I may not be doing overt things against a particular race of people, but am I doing all the things I can to make things more equitable? And that's where it becomes a crux. Most people will say, no, I'm not a racist, because those ugly people are racist. But it's what happens in those layers.
I agree. Melanie?
So I struggle with yes. Has there been a moment where I looked at myself in the mirror and said, are you being racist? Are you a racist? And the answer was yes. Obviously, I'm not, like Pat said, I'm not aggressive about it. It's definitely a lot of passivity. How do I say that word?
You got it.
Thank you. It's late. It's actually not that late. Or just growing up in an entirely white community, and then moving to Pasadena, Texas, and teaching a bunch of Latino students. It was an eye opener, and that's when I think my turning point was when I started working with another group. It wasn't Black people, although there were a few Black students in my class, and it was just understanding systemic racism from that perspective. I can't tell you how many times I had 10 and 11-year-olds come up to me and say, you just don't understand how it is. And it took a lot of humility to listen and to empathize. And that was years ago, and I'm still working on it. So I think there's been multiple times where I've looked in the mirror and said, are you being racist? Are you a racist? And I think that it is in that I find that I want to work more towards being anti-racist.
Great. Yep. Seth?
So yeah, there wasn't just one moment. I would say it was more of a gradual transition and a transformation. Slowly, getting little pieces of the mosaic, little pieces of the puzzle, seeing that that I was in a system of racism that we had just accepted as normal, as the only way of life. And I think that for me, going away to college certainly changed that. And then, I lived in South America for a little while right after college, and being in a developing world, there's certainly a lot of poverty that I wasn't accustomed to. Even my poor friends here that didn't have running water in some examples, they were much wealthier than the middle class and the countries that I lived in South America. And so I think seeing that and almost feeling at some point a sense of superiority because I didn't come from where they were. I think to me, I realized, with my uncomfortability with the people and my sense of superiority, I really grasped for the first time that I had vestiges of racism in my own heart, not just toward Black people, but feelings of I would even say, be pretty hard on myself here, but I think that's what made me repent and change, was recognizing the wrong that was there so that I could see it and turn from it and move on. But I think seeing notions of white supremacy and American imperialism, and actually recognizing those things, rejecting those ideologies, and then being able to turn from them and walk into a new and better life. I think for me, that's one of the things that it really took me seeing the ugliness of it and its depths, not just in some foreign concept or something that I saw in a movie, but seeing it in my own heart, I think is what made me most disgusted with racism and made me want to step away from it. And there's a verse in a song that says, "Don't blame your brother for the color of his skin, and don't blame your neighbor for the house he lives in. From the same cloth, we're all made. We're all the same. We have to stare in the mirror and share in the blame." And so for me, I think coming to that reckoning of, I'm dirty, I'm messed up, I'm screwed up, I have to turn from this and live a new and better life. I think for me, that was the turning point. And coming back home after that year in South America, I think that I started to see all my past experiences differently and to live my life differently. Didn't use certain words, didn't tolerate certain jokes, and certainly just tried to be a better person, be a kinder person in the community, and love all people better on the ground that they stood on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's really an important perspective, that it's almost like the farther you go in the world and the more you see, the more those illusions start to break down. And so I think that's really an important perspective, because I think people don't really understand what people mean when they say racism. It's two things. It's prejudice and power. That's the easiest way, I think, that I've read to explain it, because I can be prejudiced. All of us are prejudiced against something in some way, but we don't carry the power in this society. So, for example, if I'm walking with one of the three of our additional panelists, if I'm walking with our white panelists or on the same street, and they decide to call the police or something, and the police show up, whose story would they believe? If they said, "Hey, this lady just stole money from me or stole my wallet or whatever," the power that you have literally to just call the police and ruin my entire life is a power that we don't have. I've called the police and the police has not even shown up. I've had several run-ins with police that were unfair and not been believed. And I think that perspective that you do have power in this society, it is kind of a caste system. It's an informal caste system. It's not as formal as the one in India per se, but it exists nonetheless. There's striations, there's different socioeconomic levels in every community. We have people of color who are very wealthy. We have people of color who are in the middle class. We have people of color who are in the lower class as far as economic. But it seems like the racist thing is that no matter who you are, what you've attained, your life is not as valuable as mine. Your existence is not as important as mine. And I also just wanted to take a comment from the internet. And it says, she's on Facebook. She says, "As a white mom with biracial children, confronting my own racism has been emotional, empowering, frustrating, and confusing." So that's one thing that I wanted to ask you guys, and I'm glad that she brought this up. Mm-hmm. I don't agree that proximity to Black people can always cure racism. I mean, in a way, there are certain means, but to get past that racism. But growing up with Black people doesn't automatically cure you of racism, and having Black people in your household doesn't necessarily cure racism, because you still have these preconceived notions, you know what I mean, that don't necessarily go away because you're romantically involved or you're parenting or you're related in some kind of way. So do you all think that proximity is the key, or do you think that there's something else needed to change people's hearts and minds?
I always, in my mind, I always try and equate, if I hear somebody talk, a Black person talk about their experience as a Black person and the injustices that they've felt, I don't have any experience in that. I don't have any experience about being targeted or persecuted because of the color of my skin. My experience comes from sexual violence. And so every time I hear a story from a Black person talking about horrible things that have happened to them, I think to myself, if this was somebody talking about being objectified because of their gender or their sexual orientation, would I believe them?
Mm-hmm.
And when I started saying yes, that's when I started empathizing a lot more, believing people a lot more, and being able to listen with an open mind a lot more, because I think my suffering is not the same as your suffering, but it's still suffering nonetheless. And thinking about how I would feel if somebody disregarded my suffering makes me more open to hearing about and trying to help move forward a better way by listening to them and by thinking about their struggles as if they were my own. Not that they are my own, but to kind of, I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. So do you think that
Mhm.
Black people are not being believed? Do you think that's the real issue?
Yes. Yes. I think that's the issue. I think that's what I was trying to say. And I know that was a big issue for me. Like, how can it possibly be this bad? But it is this bad. And I've heard over and over again that it is this bad. And then, you know, I'm glad that brave people, men and women alike in the Black community, have spoken out and said, this is happening. This is happening to us. We are afraid, we are angry, and we need help.
Thank goodness for smartphones, right?
Yes,
Clearly, we need some proof.
Yes, absolutely.
And I feel like with the death of George Floyd, that was one of the absolute proof that there was no other explanation for what happened. It shouldn't, all those other deaths that came before shouldn't have had to have been proven that they were brutal murders.
Mm-hmm.
But there was always a little bit of, well, we didn't get all the angle, or we missed that part of the video. With his death, it was absolute. This is what happened. You can't deny it. And I think that was a smack in the face for a lot of us, because we always wanted there to be an excuse. You know, if there was another reason other than I'm white and I hate you and I'm going to kill you, you know, we don't want to have that ugliness. So we paper over it. But this was one time it couldn't be papered over. And I agree with Melanie. I think the belief part of it is very key. And I think now, I hope now, people are listening more, are trying to listen more. But I think it's still going to come at a price. And I think it's a very difficult process to change that ingrained reaction of, no, you know, come on, it's not that bad. It's all in your head.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's being said. I call it a smugness. That's how I think that some of these cops, that's what they have, because that cop in particular that murdered George, he had smugness about him. He didn't move regardless of, even if his partners had said something, I don't think it would have made a difference for him, because he, at that point, once he put his hand in his pocket, he was all in. And I'm gonna do this. I don't care. And nothing's gonna stop me. He knew he was being videoed. He heard people yelling at him. He did it, and he wanted to do it. And because he knew that there would be no consequences.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is that also, the knowingness that I can do this and I can get away with it and there will be no consequences for my actions. And I will be believed. I will be believed. And it's always been that way. I think back to what you were saying earlier, Melanie, about the 10 and 11-year-olds that were telling you that you just didn't understand. And I think it's because you didn't see and you couldn't see. But now that we have cameras, I don't think it's gotten worse. I think it's gotten exposure.
Exactly. It's definitely not. I don't think it's gotten worse. I think it's just a matter of, I think Will Smith said that too. Like, it's not that racism is getting worse, it's that it's being recorded. And any 10-year-old Black kid can probably give you an example of racism that they've faced. Like I said, I started experiencing racism from the age of 10 when I went to a school that was mixed. My first day in Tampa, Florida, my first day of school, I took a long division test. And the teacher put all the scores up on the wall because I guess back in those days you could share each other's test scores. And coming from a gifted school, this was really easy for me, but I got the highest test in the highest grade, which is 100. And a little white girl came up to me and said, "There's got to be some sort of mistake. You just got here. You just took this test." And my mom said, "Black people can't be smarter than us." Ooh. So first day moving to Florida, that was my experience. But I mean, I could give you a million examples of these. You know, it's not aggressive all the time. It's not anybody calling me the N-word to my face. It's not anything. You know, I have been called the N-word before, but it's not always that blatant. It's just little things that kind of chip away at your faith in this country. It chips away in your feeling of security when you're around white people, because you look and you're saying, they don't even see me as a person. Wow. You know, and that's ingrained in you from small, you know, on up, whether it's television or, you know, all the messages we receive in this society. You know, even our portrayal on TV, we see the same things about us that you all see about us. We see gangbangers on TV and we see the news and how they cover us on TV and stuff. And the fact that it doesn't really match reality a lot of times, it's just like, wow, okay, I guess that's the show they're going to go with, huh? We don't have, I guess we only have one type of show, two types of shows that just doesn't match my reality, doesn't match my network. It doesn't match the people that I know who are family people, who are goal oriented, who do what they're supposed to do, who are hardworking. And when you look at what everyone is being fed, not even just by you guys' community or your family, but literally in the media has programmed all of us to see Black people that way. It's really effective too.
Yeah, very effective. And I say the same thing. I echo what you're saying, is that what we see on TV is not, I don't know anyone like that. I had an Asian friend once that actually asked me, you know, so do you call all of your friends the B words? Because a lot of times in these books, and they're novels, you know, fictional books with fictional characters, and they like, "Hey B, what's going on?" And she asked me if that were true. And I looked at her and I said, I have known you for years. Like, you ever heard me talk like that? And she just felt like I was one way with her and one way with someone else. And that's really how a lot of people view Black people. Like, you work every day, you congregate with them, and then when they go home, they rob, they steal, they go out and rape people, I mean, how ridiculous is that? But I'm telling you, a lot of people would feel that way if someone they've worked with for years, that you know to be a decent person, honest person, hardworking, and they were falsely accused of something, how many people that they know would say, oh, I believe he did it. Well, they all, and that's what happens. And the media
It is.
in that mindset. The media keeps us in that mindset through the sitcoms, through these reality shows, through all of that. And then we, where you guys, white people sit at home and say, yeah, I knew that they were like that. I know it's in all of them. And that's how people get followed in stores and that kind of thing. And if I even feel like I'm being followed in a department store, I leave. You don't
Yeah,
get me. That's
same here.
I don't try to argue. I don't try to, how many times can you help me? Like, I've been here for 10 minutes and you've asked me, can you help me 4 times? And there's 10 other people. I'm out.
Ironically, it was like a crew of white girls at my high school that were doing all the shoplifting, honestly. But they knew that they weren't being looked at. They knew that they weren't going to get caught, they knew that, nobody was really following them or looking at them. And just another point on the media perspective, like when we see shows that might be like Ozark or Breaking Bad or shows about white crime, we don't just assume all white people are that way. But it seems that when, non-Black people see Black people represented as those things on TV, they take that to mean that we are all that way. And because of that lack of exposure, we are supposed to understand. We are supposed to not generalize, not judge white people, because there are all different kinds of white people. But it seems that we are not given that same benefit of the doubt, because that's what works to keep us at that lower level. Those assumptions, those stereotypes kind of operate to keep us, at that lower caste in this system. So, yeah.
The reality of, as far as like violence in young people, is that the media completely glosses over the fact that this kind of changes subject a little bit tangentially, but most of the shooters in high school shootings are white boys.
Yeah.
But nobody ever talks about that.
No.
But if there's a Black teenager singularly shot on the street, then it's always a Black teenager. But if it's a school shooter, it's a teenager.
Right. That is a good point.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine.
That's why I'm here.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all part of keeping the society the way that it is. And when the white boys shoot people, and lots of them at one time, he has some type of mental illness, because of course he would just go out, is that angry, and that he would go out and just shoot all these people. And it's very interesting. Seth, did you want to say something?
Not really. I'm hearing what you guys are saying. I'm listening.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were gonna say something, but so
I just wanted to chime in on that too. So the angry factor, like I have a teenage son, and I just got through doing a little submission for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. They asked people for their perspectives of like why, like how all this COVID mixed with social unrest is affecting you. So I sent them a little blurb. And one of the reasons why it's affecting me is because my son is growing. And I've mentioned this before in different forums, but every month he gets an inch taller, it seems. I don't know if you all have sons, but like when they hit that growth spurt, they're up there, and it's just, people are looking at him differently nowadays. And you could see the transition from when he was seen as a kid to now that he's grown up size, how people are clutching their bags and how people are moving out of his way. And, he reached for Twizzlers one day at the store. and there was an older white man there, and the older white man covered his pocket, like where his wallet was, as if my son was reaching for his wallet. It's like, no, he's reaching for the Twizzlers. But, you know, he doesn't know my son is basically a nerd who really, really likes Twizzlers. All he sees is a teenager with dreadlocks who's going to rob him. And it's like, but it's those type of things. Like I pointed out to my son later, like, but the fact that I even have to point that out or practice, hey, have your hands on the steering wheel if a police officer pulls you over. We've actually done role plays with that because we're trying to save his life. We've actually done full out role plays with my son. We enrolled my son in the sheriff's summer camp every summer since he's been 10 years old, just so the sheriffs will know his face. As many sheriffs as possible will know his face, know his name, because of the fear that somebody is going to take my baby's life for no other reason than he couldn't get his ID out of his pocket fast enough, or they thought he was reaching for something, but it was really just his cell phone or anything like that. To walk out of your house every day and feel like your child's life could be taken for absolutely no good reason. It doesn't matter what neighborhood you live in, you know, it doesn't matter where you are. It could be a white neighborhood. It could be any neighborhood in America. We have this problem. There's nowhere we could go where that wouldn't be the case. So, you know, if any teenage person has a reason to be angry, it's our kids. They're traumatized every single day because they have moms and dads like, wait, be careful. Wait, be careful. Wait, don't do this. Don't do that. You know, make sure you have a receipt before you leave. They'll think you're stealing. You know, it's that constant fear that you live with in this society, that it's a testament to strength of will that more teenagers aren't walking around traumatized and harming themselves or harming other people, because it's really a lot to carry with you.
And I think that fear, that deep inward, you know, because they turn it on themselves, fear is perceived as anger. And it's really not.
It's not. You're right.
Really, really afraid. Really, really afraid. So I have another question. So what is your response when you see discriminatory actions by other white people? Or how do you feel if you don't say anything? Because I think that is really the issue, because if we see it, I know y'all see it too, you know, but what is your response when you see it? And is it, I don't want to get involved, I don't want this to happen to me, oh, am I going to be called the N-word lover like they used to? You know, if anybody intervened, that's what would happen. You know, are we still in those times? And so I'd like to ask each of you that question. Don't all jump in at once.
I think if I have to be completely honest, what I would say was, I would like to think that I would jump in and say something, but I don't know if I've put myself in enough places where I don't think I think I still segregate myself to a pretty large extent. And so I don't know if I would be given the opportunity. I don't know if I know enough about maybe even microaggressions to say that I would recognize them if I saw them. And so that's my completely honest answer. I would love to say, like, I would stand up and say something if I saw if I saw somebody else do it. I think that I recognize it more in myself than I do in other people. I went back and forth. I don't know if I want to share this story, but I think I'm going to share it anyway. I took my kids. I've got a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Your volume,
Oh,
Your volume,
sorry.
yeah.
your volume
Yeah.
went out for a second.
Oh, okay. So
Okay.
can you hear me now?
It did it again.
Oh, well, okay, I'll talk fast. So I took my kids to a park. They're 5 and 2. And when we were there, we were one of 2 families there. There were 2 Black boys there, also probably about 5 and 2. They looked about the same size and age as my kiddos. And I saw out of the corner of my eye my son on the ground and the other Black 2-year-old boy standing there above him. And I scooped up my son and I picked him up and I just walked him away. And I looked at the boy, the Black boy, and I said, that was mean. And all I know is that my kid was on the ground and the Black kid was standing up. And I was really ashamed of myself for the way that I had handled that situation. I knew it instantly that that was my bias, that was my prejudice. And I was completely embarrassed because for all I know, that could have been that boy's first experience with racism. And I had to make it right. Not maybe, and maybe he was too little and he won't remember, but I knew that his brother was old enough to remember. And so I really gently called him over and I went on my knees to look him in the eye. And I said to the boy, I am so sorry. I don't know exactly what happened, but you were playing nicely with my son, with my boy. And all of a sudden he was on the ground and I was afraid that he was hurt and I thought that you hurt him. But I don't think that you're a bad person and I don't think that you hurt him. And I think I made a mistake and I'm very sorry. Do you forgive me? And so I would like to say that I would stand up for it, but if I'm still guilty of participating in it, I don't know what I would do.
Hmm.
Okay. Thanks for your transparency. Can't hear you again.
Oh, I am a work in progress.
Okay. Who's next? I don't want to point. I don't want to call you.
Well, I'll go next. I think my experiences are similar to Melanie's in that I honestly was struggling to think of a situation where I did see overt discrimination or, nasty behavior towards someone that it seemed to be racially driven. I think where I experience it more is through social media. I think that's where I see people that I had maybe formerly respected come out every once in a while with statements that are from like that place. When that happens, unfortunately, there are times when I think, okay, nothing I say is going to change that person's mind. And I know that's the cop-out because I'm not even given the chance for their mind to be changed. Recently, it happened where there were some statements made that were horrendous. And I did come back. And I try to counteract what's being said with as much factual information as I can, in terms of, links to information, things that support the statements that were being made were against Black Lives Matter. And, what do these people really want? And the movement has all this money and they're not using it to feed the poor and they're not using it for this and they're not using it for that. And it's like, well, that wasn't why they were formed. That's not the basis of that organization.
Right.
So when there's factual information that I feel like, okay, maybe if I can smack them a little with this, that they'll pay attention. It didn't work. And I feel like that's an ongoing battle because there's such support in numbers. Somebody will say something that's fairly racist, and then you have all these people jump on. And I'm struggling with what is the proper response to that? Do we jump in and try to show the other side, or are they really just looking for a fight at times, or for more support of their racist views?
Wow.
Okay. That,
Right. Yeah, sure.
Mhm.
I've come across a lot of situations, in the past several years, and in a lot more recently, because everything's been so volatile here recently, I guess. And I think the battle has to be won in both the heart and the mind. Before, I used to just kind of ignore people, and then ignore and roll my eyes, and then I get frustrated and say something stupid. But I've come to realize that none of that helps. And so really you have to engage people on a heart level to be able to access their mind, I think, because they'll close you out if they don't care, they won't care to hear what you say. And so I think you have to kind of trigger people to let them know, look, just because that guy was born to a black mother and a black father, does that make him morally inferior to you? You have to get them really thinking, really stir them up a little bit, I think. And then you can kind of start to give them a little bit of logic as to why their behavior is so fallen and stupid. And I've had a lot of good conversations with people, and people don't even realize. I think there's overt racism, certainly, but I think that's definitely in the minority now. I think a lot more of what we see is just a product of the systems of racism that we all live in. And so I think that a lot of times people don't even recognize the error of their way. And so we kind of have to gently come alongside and persuade them that there's a much better way. So that's really been my approach. And honestly, it happens all the time on social media, and it happens quite often. I work in the construction trade. I have a granite countertop business. So it happens with employees, it happens with clients, different guys in the construction world, black, white, whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on, as you can imagine. But I had more opportunities to have those conversations than you would believe.
Melanie, I want to go back to something that you said about the encounter you had with the very young black boy, and something that I struggle with, because something similar like that happened to me, whereas a white woman was yelling at me, and I was young, about something I had nothing to do with. I was just in the area, and I'm black. And what that does is it also makes people question the authority of white people. That I think that especially black boys, because they can be really talked to in a way that's demeaning, that's scary. You have a 5-foot person and you're 2 years old, and so again, the polarization of the fear starts, and it just continues to, yeah, they're angry, they're afraid. That's a lot of times that's why they run, because they know if they stay, something bad's gonna happen.
Right.
I'm going to get beat up, I'm going to get slapped around, I'm going to get charged with something that I didn't do. So that's why they run, they resist. And again, it's not even making excuses, because I had this conversation not too long ago with someone who was saying, oh, you're making excuses. It's like you're supposed. No, because I'm an American too. They're Americans too. If you stop me without cause, I have a right to say, why are you stopping me? I don't want to answer your questions. I need a lawyer. But to the average, well, I'm not going to say average, but to some white cops, that is resisting arrest. And it is standing up for my rights by the Constitution. And a lot of black men in particular are not allowed to do that. There was also a study done in Louisiana, because it's an open carry state where you can, openly carry guns. And so they had a black guy walk down the street with his rifle strapped on him, and immediately like 20 cops were there get on the ground. And they arrested him. He had done nothing. So then they send a young white boy with his gun and crickets. One cop asked him where was he going and where was he, and why was he carrying. He says, okay, thanks, have a nice day, because it's perfectly legal. But I'm saying that think about the unfairness of that, and you see that on a daily basis.
Yep.
And that's what we have to get away from. That's what we have to address in this time, because the time is now. And I think that these type of conversations need to continue.
And I hope
know that it's in you until you start having conversations like this. Okay,
and I think that's really an important point that you make, Dorothy, because I think it's up to white people to have these conversations, because
yes,
it's not really us that can do that. We're operating from a position where we don't have the leverage, we don't have the familiarity, we don't have the ear of white people, because we're not them. We are not in their families. We're not in their, so for many of them, we're not even in their neighborhoods or in their social circles. So I think this is the responsibility of white people who understand this to make those type of changes and have those type of difficult conversations. And because you have that power, like I can give you an example. I showed a house in Alexandria to a white client. She was late arriving. I unlocked the door. The alarm didn't work. So the alarm goes off. So I stand outside because, of course, I'm terrified that I will be arrested. So I stand outside. I have my ID, my realtor card and everything like that. Everybody comes out. The police come. They don't believe me. They're like, what are you doing here? I get fully questioned, everything like that. And they do not believe, even with my realtor ID, even with the key in my hand, the key to the door in my hand, until my white client pulls up and says, hey, what's going on? When she comes, a regular woman, nothing different about her. She wasn't like a politician. She wasn't the Pope. It was just a regular woman that came up. And because she was white, they literally just walked off. She didn't live in the house. She was looking at purchasing the house, but it was just the matter of her saying, and I've had a similar experience with Black clients. And it's like, are all of you guys family? What's going on here? So it's not us. We don't have that same power in the society. Like I said, racism is prejudice plus power. And so I hope that you all realize the power that you have in whiteness to make that kind of change on an individual level. So that's it. That's my comment.
So do you guys believe that you have the power? Because a lot of times, I think I heard you say that earlier, Pat, that, what I say, I'm one person, I can't change their mind. I like giving them facts instead of trying to, reason with them, and I get it, because they're, depending on whatever situation, there's just some people you can't reason with. But again, I would like to see roundtables with white people sitting around saying, what can I do? Now, I believe that's why you guys are here. I do believe that, because that you wanted to be part of this roundtable because you want to help. But those are some of the things that you can do to help, which is enlighten people, which is, try to get to know Black people, try to get to know them. Because if you try to get to know them, you would see that, and there's bad apples in every race, in every ethnic group. But if you are constantly through social media, through TV, through all these outlets, just hearing the bad, of course, after a while, that's what advertising does. It changes your mind. It gets you to agree with what they're saying. And I think that it has been stupendous. It has worked tremendously. And so that's one of the things I hope that you guys can take from this is that, we can go to our community, to our local churches, to, places and say, hey, this isn't right. And I hate saying it's not fair because, that's one of the little hangups. And white people say, well, they always say it's not fair. Well, life's not fair. Well, we get that. We understand. But there are no laws that are put in place, no policies that are put in place to hold a whole group of people, in an oppressive state. Because that's the system that we live in right now.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would say I want to throw this out there, but if any of you all run into belligerent white people that need to be talked to by somebody, let me know. I'm always available and willing to talk to anybody. So if you run across a situation where you think I could be of some sort of help, let me know.
I will reach out to you, Seth.
Thank you.
They're usually only belligerent on the internet these days, so.
Otherwise, they get worried about getting punched in the face, right?
Yeah, not going to solve the problem, but.
Oh, we have a comment from the internet.
Okay.
On Facebook, someone says, "I think a lot of white people still think they're not racist, and they're the hardest to change. You got to admit the problem first." Do you think that's the hardest part, is getting anyone to admit racism, or?
Yes. I think that's the biggest part. Is I think that oh gosh. But now
I think when you lean in,
better?
It sounds better. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'll lean in. So I think that part of the reason, I think Pat touched on this earlier, the definition of racism has become a lot more all-encompassing, especially lately, where you talk, it's not just about burning a cross in somebody's yard anymore. It's about microaggressions. It's about systemic racism. It's about a lot of different things. And so when you hear somebody call you racist, there's like this, it catches you off guard because you're participating in that, you were in a part of the society, but you feel like if you're a good person, you're not trying to be. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pat.
The only thing I was going to say is what I find interesting. Using the word racist obviously is very charged, but it's always interesting to see people's reaction, white people's reaction, when you talk to them about white privilege. The defenses go up even higher in some ways because it's easy for people to say, I'm not a racist. Racist wears a hood that's white or whatever. But when you talk about white privilege, it's like, well, no, I had to fight for what I got and they should have to fight for what they get. And instead of understanding that the race, not in terms of race, but the battle to get ahead in life is rigged. And,
Absolutely.
And the white, it's like running a race, and two people are running the race, and one person has their legs tied together and the other person doesn't. And you say, go. Well, who's going to win?
Right.
But that's where I find it very fascinating. In some of the discussions I've had with people, that raises the defenses even higher.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And do you think that a lot of white people have stereotypical views of Blacks and other minorities? And that doesn't make it, because I think that like you were saying, calling someone a racist now, that they think that is very, very negative, and that you're aggressive, and that you're doing all these things that are like borderline illegal and discriminating against people, when it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the power that you exude, like what Amy Cooper did, because I'm sure she would say, I'm not a racist. And this woman in Boston called the police and said that this Black man was attacking her simply because he asked her to leash her dog. And that's what I'm saying. And she has said, I am not a racist. I am not. So what category is that? Because I'm saying a lot of people, white people, have stereotypical views, and it's subconscious. It's not even aware of it. That's why they say, oh, no, not me, not me. But the view is there based on your reaction. It's based on your reaction. And then when you get home, you said, oh, it didn't mean that. It didn't mean, but you had made a blink decision, a quick decision based on your unconscious bias and stereotypical views of Black and other minority people.
Well, on a more positive note, I think the fact that there have been so many programs, we were talking about TV and the media, I think there is more awareness being brought out because of, unfortunately, the preponderance of evidence showing police brutality, showing systemic racism, that it's harder and harder to ignore. And I think the education is an important component that's happening more so now than I believe has happened in the past. The fact that there are more white people that are taking part in the protests, I think that's an incredibly positive thing, because it is saying that there are white people who are taking responsibility for this need and want to walk side by side, as opposed to saying, it's your problem, you guys, you handle it. And maybe we'll pass a law in your favor once in a while, and that'll be fine. But I think that I think education is an incredibly important part of all of this. And I think there has been a lot more opportunities for those kinds of exchanges and education than I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah,
I agree.
Well, one show I think I would recommend is W. Kamau Bell, United Shades of America. It's really, really informative. He just did one about farming last Sunday. I think that's like a Sunday show. So if you guys have a chance, I'd binge watch all those seasons. They're all really eye-opening. And he talks to everybody involved across the spectrum. He talks to white folks, Black folks, Latino folks, Asian folks about, what they're experiencing in America. And like, people are really honest with him. And then he kind of blows that out to the general statistics, and he gives numbers and facts and figures. So it really is an interesting show. So I don't know if any folks would be interested, because sometimes I feel like people dig their heels in and they cover their ears and like, I don't want to hear anything. I have my opinion. I don't want it to change. But if anybody wants to do that research and take a look, and if you can convince anybody that maybe to hear another perspective, I think that would be great. Oh yeah, somebody else DVRs that show on the comments. Yeah, that is a good show. Facebook comments. So okay.
Melanie?
Oh yeah. So so one of the things that I see a lot is how maybe this is maybe a question for me, for Pat and Seth. What do you do when you encounter somebody who doesn't believe that they are racist? Like, how do you, because I want to be here to help and to amplify the voices that I hear, the Black voices around me that I'm hearing. but I don't, but oftentimes I feel like even me sharing stories that I've heard or sharing experiences, they're falling on deaf ears. And so what are some of the ways, have you found ways that you can kind of connect with people who are white to say, no, this really is a thing?
I don't have an answer. What I find happens is I just get classified as, oh, she's one of those liberals. So I'm getting put in a box because I'm trying to break down the box.
I get that a lot too.
Yeah. So I don't know the answer. I wish I did. I feel like I'd be much more effective if I had a method or a message that could break through a little better.
Yeah. Well, I have a question. It's kind of an odd one, but if you were to break down American racism by percentages, what percentage would be fear? What percentage would be superiority? And what percentage would just be stereotypes? Like, what contributes to that? Is it 33, 33, 33? Like, is it like 90% a feeling of superiority? Like, how would you break that down?
I'm not really thinking of it in terms of like linear. I'm thinking about it like an outer shell. Like the outer shell is those stereotypes, right? And then maybe the inside of that is you want to feel superior, or a white person wants to feel superior, because on the inside,
It's fear.
They're afraid.
Wow.
I've had talks about this with my with some people close to me in my family, and particularly in unskilled labor jobs. People working in unskilled labor are always concerned with people taking their jobs from them. Specifically people of color and minorities. They're very concerned with somebody coming and taking my job. And so I think that's where the fear comes from. There's like a lack of, they feel like an insecurity there with their future, which makes them feel like, well, I should have this because I worked hard for it, which we've talked about here. And then I think it all kind of gets wrapped up into a neat little package with the stereotypes. Wow. I don't know if I can put numbers on it though.
That's a really good model, like to organize it, like in my head. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Well, I think, like, I remember a quote that I read that said, to the oppressor, equality feels like oppression. So does that make sense? Like, if you're on top, when having people equal to you feels like you're being oppressed. And I think that's where that's my perception. When, talking to people who have these views, that me advocating for myself and saying that my life matters makes you feel like somehow I'm taking something away from you. and that's, I mean, I think that the model that you just gave kind of sums that up. That quote, it kind of like makes that really, really clear in my mind anyway. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, back to the beginning of the question that led into all this, I think that one of the hardest people to explain white privilege to is an old rich white guy that's worked really hard to get where he is.
Right.
Because they see that they didn't have a free pass. There's no such thing as a free pass. And I think that we have to acknowledge with all these issues that they're not just, pardon the metaphor, they're not all just black and white. We're not monolithic as white people. Black people aren't monolithic. We're all very different, coming from different places. We're at different levels of coming out of our racism and, understanding where we are and how to better love other races. And so I think that, for people like that, it's not saying, to an old rich white guy, it's not saying that he had it easy and that black guys will never get rich. It's that he had a little bit easier time than the black guy that he went to school with would have, because of the systems that were rigged against him the whole time. And
Right.
so I think,
And his color wasn't the thing holding him back.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, I think it's better for all of us to foster understanding and realize that things are more nuanced. And I think it helps in conversations too, because people think you're just trying to fleece them. If you paint these concepts as all very clear, black and white, because they're not. But I think it's good to just kind of help nurture people along. If you're true and a straight shooter and you help them understand the complexities of all this.
Wow.
Great.
Okay. Well, we're at 8:30 now, Dorothy. So
Yes, this was great. This was really good. Yeah.
yeah. Well, I really appreciate all of you coming. Thank you to our viewers that were online and all of you who are going to watch this afterward when it's up on YouTube. And I'm really happy that we could have this honest discussion and share all of our viewpoints. And I'm hoping that these type of conversations can lead people in a more positive direction, because we do have so much work to do to make America live up to her promises. And so with that, Dorothy, do you have any additional closing stuff? Anybody else have?
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys for being honest, for being open, for being willing, and for taking the time. And great conversation. And I do thank you for being as open as you were. It's great. And share it with your friends. The white
That's right. Our white friends. That's right.
Thank you for joining us, Dorothy. This is great.
Yes,
thank you, Dorothy.
Very
You guys
much.
have anything to say before we, because we're right at 8:30. Do you have anything to say? If not, it's fine, but if you do, we want to give you that opportunity.
Yeah, no, just thanks for doing this and thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah.
And we have thank yous coming from the comments online. So
Great.
all righty.
Great. Thank you guys for watching and listening.
Yes, thank you. All right. For Southern Marylanders for Racial Equality, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.